Chris Lynch News with Boxman. Buy or hire our shipping containers, both new and used, available right here in Christchurch. Call 0800 Boxman.
Good evening. Well, Muslim and Jewish communities across New Zealand say they're feeling vulnerable as the Israel-Gaza conflict escalates. To discuss this, I'm joined by the New Zealand Jewish Council spokeswoman, Juliet Moses. Good evening and thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
You've said there can be no peace without the destruction of the genocidal ideology of Hamas. How can that be achieved without killing innocent civilians?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question because Hamas, as is very well documented, uses human shields, both its own people and, of course, now the 199 Israelis who it's taken hostage. In every war, unfortunately, civilians die. I don't think there's been any war ever in the history of the world when civilians haven't died. So, I know that Israel will do everything it can to minimize civilian deaths. It always does. But we've seen what's happened now with Hamas and how barbaric it is. If anybody can come up with a better alternative for defeating Hamas, I'd like to hear what it is, because ultimately Hamas is not only killing and making the lives of Israelis miserable, it's also doing the same to the people of the people of Gaza. So there cannot be any peace while Hamas is there in power.
I think it's interesting to point out that when the media speaks of the Ministry of Health coming from the likes of Gaza, the spokespeople on behalf of that so-called Ministry of Health are in fact Hamas. Is it your understanding?
Absolutely. I mean, Hamas is the governing entity there. There are no checks and balances like we have here. It's not a democracy. Hamas was elected in 2005, but there's never been an election since then. There is no free press. You can, look at Reporters Without Borders. You can look at Freedom House. There is no freedom of press there. And we've seen what happens occasionally when someone had spoken out against Hamas. The very best fate they can, within Gaza, the very best fate that they can hope for is to be imprisoned. So this is not anything like a democracy or the kind of world that we're used to living in. There are simply no transparency. It's lies. There's no scrutiny. Yeah, there's none of the sort of mechanisms that would normally exist or that do exist in democracies.
Juliet, isn't the problem, though, that the bombing in Gaza is going to produce yet another generation of radicals because of the destruction that's going on right now? So in a sense, this conflict never ends. That
is certainly a risk. And look, I'm no geopolitical expert, but we have seen, we saw what happened in Rwanda, right, with the genocide and what's happened there. We've seen peace between Israel and with Jordan, with Egypt, recently with the Abraham Accords. And part of the reason experts think that we're now seeing, that we saw these heinous attacks from Hamas was that Israel and Saudi Arabia were very close to normalization, and nobody would have ever predicted that 10 years ago. And we've seen what's happened, for example, in Northern Ireland. So things can change. There are certainly generations who are being brought up to hate in Gaza, and we know that because we've seen the content of their curriculum at their schools. But it can change. I think we have to hope and pray, because that's the only way to peace here.
There have been several candlelight vigils across New Zealand. There was one in Christchurch last night. I want to get your reaction to that, given the fact that they say they want peace. There are signs there that do say boycott Israel. Is that perhaps providing a mixed message to members of the public who may be unaware of the conflict? And I wonder what your thoughts were.
Look, to be honest, if that's all they said, then in the scheme of things right now, I don't have it's certainly, I've seen much worse in the last few days. I mean, we saw people in Auckland chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which if you look at a map and if you read the Hamas charter, it is a Hamas rallying cry. It's calling for the destruction of Israel and probably the slaughter of Jews, because that is the Hamas charter. So, I mean, in normal times, I might say, yeah, that's not great. But if they're saying they want peace, and the peace that they mean is two states, one for Jewish people, one for Palestinian people, living side by side, securely, and believing each other has the right to exist. Fantastic. I don't have a problem with that. If it's talking about boycotting Israel and it's subscribing to the BDS campaign, which actually doesn't believe that Israel has a right to exist and is not premised on that basis, then that's a different story.
The Māori Party said, and I quote, Hamas must immediately release hostages and work towards peace. I mean, what do you make of those types of statements? Work towards peace. It's almost as if they truly believe that Hamas is capable of peace.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was a shocking statement from Te Pāti Māori, to be honest, which shows an extremely, at best, I would say, superficial. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's a superficial misunderstanding or a superficial understanding of what's going on there. And it perhaps it's deliberate, I don't know. But, there, as I've said, I mean, Hamas has in its charter unequivocally in black and white the obliteration of Israel and the genocide of Jews. It is a genocidal organisation. How can you have peace with Hamas, with an organisation that calls for your genocide? If anybody would like to explain how you can have peace with them or what the appropriate response is to them, I'd be very interested to hear.
I know that Muslim and Jewish communities right across New Zealand are feeling vulnerable given what's happening with the conflict. How are, in your view, the New Zealand Jewish community coping with what's happening, and how vulnerable do you think they're feeling, Juliet?
Extremely vulnerable. Probably the most vulnerable, I would say, that we've ever felt in our history here, and we've been here for 160 years or whatever it is. Very vulnerable, very scared, particularly upset about some of the things that we've seen happen. The protest at the Auckland Museum, for example, when it lit up for the victims of the terrorist attacks in Israel, that was not a peaceful rally or peaceful protest. I've seen the footage. It was not peaceful, and there were threats made. There are some very bad things happening around the place, and the temperature really somehow needs to be de-escalated. We closed our synagogues last Friday, and our community centres, our school, because of the declared Hamas global day of rage. We've seen overnight a synagogue being destroyed in Tunisia, one in Berlin being firebombed. We are very, very feeling very vulnerable, very upset, obviously, about what we saw happen in Israel. People who've been affected. Everybody who knows someone in Israel knows, there's like 2 degrees of separation. So if you know someone in Israel, that person absolutely knows someone who's been killed or has been taken hostage. So we're dealing with that, the terrible grief about that and the shock and the barbarity of it. And then we're dealing with our own issues here.
How do you think we can de-escalate tensions in New Zealand as this war continues? And it looks like there's no let up for, who knows, days, weeks, months.
Well, a lot of it comes from leaders. So political leaders, civil society leaders, the media. It's all of that is really important in setting the right tone and giving the right messages. And, that message can be, we can have different views and opinions about what's going on. We can feel strongly about it. That's fine. That's obviously what's going to happen. We're in a democracy, but we don't need to import that stuff here, in the sense of making threats or becoming violent or making other people feel unsafe and like they're not able to express their own views, assuming that they express them in a way that, is peaceful and is not inciting violence or not making other people feel threatened.
Do you personally feel for your own safety now? Do you feel in any way threatened, Juliet, by what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm sort of at the forefront of dealing with media and talking about issues, and I do worry about it, but I'm not going to shy away from talking about what's important for me and for my community. And, I have to hope that New Zealand, this country that I've grown up in and that I love and that I've generally felt very safe in, will continue on the same road, and that police and other government agencies will be doing their job.
New Zealand Jewish Council spokeswoman Juliet Moses, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate your point of view.
Thank you.